Hey, what's up, you guys? My name is Grace Lauren Taylor, and you are listening to episode 40 of the Trauma Dump podcast. Oh, we made it. We made it to 40. Thank you so much for joining us. Here at the Trauma Dump podcast, we seek to answer the question, what is mental health? How do I take care of my own, and how do I support others? This week, we will be discussing the topic of coping with childhood abuse with our very special guest of the week, Megan. You can go follow Megan over on TikTok. I think their TikTok is Nage Malin. That is NAGEMLYNN. Make sure you go check out Megan over on TikTok and show her some love for being on this episode of our podcast. And remember, if you'd like to share on the show, please message us in our Discord and the podcast participants channel along with your unique experiences, and we will match you to the right episode. And just a quick disclaimer before we start, I am not a licensed health professional. This podcast only seeks to create community and further understanding of these topics that are so often overlooked and extremely misunderstood. If you or a loved one are in need of medical professional help, we have resources in our description and in our Discord. The topics discussed here are for a mature audience, so viewer discretion is always advised. So, childhood trauma refers to any scary, dangerous, violent, or life-threatening event that happens to a child within the ages of, 0 to 18. The National Child Abuse Hotline is 1-800-4-CHILD. That is 1-800-422-4453. If you suspect your own child or another child is being abused, please contact the Child National Help Abuse Hotline, or visit the federally funded Child Welfare Information Gateway, and the link is going to be in our description. And if you need immediate help, please contact 911. The SAMHSA Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration is a really great resource for anyone dealing with the after effects of childhood trauma. Also, call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org. If you or someone that you know is struggling and is in a crisis, call or text 988. You will be able to reach and speak to a trained crisis counselor anytime, day or night. So they're open 24/7. My cats they have the zoomies today. So if you hear some stuff going on, those are the cats. Childhood trauma occurs way more than you think. More than 2/3 of children reported at least one traumatic event by the age of 16. Potentially traumatic events include psychological, physical, or sexual abuse, community or school violence, witnessing or experiencing domestic violence, national disasters or terrorism, commercial sexual exploitation, sudden or violent loss of a loved one, refugee or war experiences, military family stressors, physical or sexual assault, neglect, or serious life-threatening illnesses. So today we're going to be talking to Megan about the after effects of childhood trauma as an adult. Once you've hit the age of 20, 30, 40, and suddenly all of these things that have happened to you in childhood come flooding back, how do you deal with those things? How do you deal with the after effects of childhood trauma when you're an adult? How do you cope with those things? And how do you prevent your own childhood trauma from impacting your other relationships? How do you learn to trust people? There's so much, when you're a child and you go through a very traumatic event, it shakes your foundation as a person. So if your foundation as a person is shaken at such a young age, how do you redevelop that foundation to becoming a better person or a more capable person? And that's what we're going to be discussing in this episode. So let's get into it. But before we get into it, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. And if you like this podcast, if after a while you've watched a couple minutes, you're like, I need to send this to a friend, please do. Please do. It really helps us out a lot, and it helps, the channel grow, and it helps you grow, and it helps more people become trauma informed. All right, I've talked too much. Let's get into this episode. Welcome to the podcast, Megan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm alive. I have a new room, a new studio. I'm so excited.
Yes, you're doing a whole move, right?
Yeah, we moved to our house. Dude,
That's
it's been intense.
always fun.
You know what makes it even better is that my cats, I have two. I have Loki and Lucy. My cats have decided to pee on all of my furniture.
Oh no, they're mad.
Yeah, pee on our beanbag like 7 different times. It's a like
Oh,
waterproof cover. So I've washed that waterproof
oh,
cover like 7 times. I just washed all of the couch cushions.
oh God.
I'm losing my mind. And I'm like, Joey, are these cats even worth it? And he's like, they're my babies.
Oh,
Like,
that's
dude,
tough.
your babies are pissing everywhere.
That sucks. Maybe they'll get used to it in like a week or so.
That's what the internet says. The internet was like, oh, first remove all of the cardboard boxes. If they're continuing to pee on things, add an extra litter box. And then we have two already. So I'm like, okay, I guess I have to have three.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I don't know.
That's fun. Super fun.
What have you been up to?
Gosh, catching up on lots of emails and stuff today, lots of tech stuff that I've been putting off. So I've just been glued to my computer for like the last 2 days.
I feel that. I feel that 100%. I like your little background. I like the leaves. It's
Thank
very,
you. I actually just redid this. So all my plants are on display now.
it looks nice. It looks
Thank
nice.
you.
Now, before we start the interview, you use she, her pronouns, correct?
Yes, correct.
Awesome. And are you comfortable with discussing your personal experiences?
I am, yes.
Okay. And to make sure I'm not crossing any of your boundaries and respecting your experiences, please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you feel uncomfortable or triggered. We can also take a break at any time. And if you don't feel like answering a question, be like, Grace, skip.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That sounds good.
My priority is to make sure you feel safe at all times because trauma is really isolating, but we're not going to isolate today. We're going to talk about it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, my goodness. So, you wanted to discuss childhood abuse and dealing with it as an adult. Unpack that for me. Why did you want that to be the topic at hand?
Well, it's kind of my focus with my life coaching and what I center my TikTok content around. For me, it was really hard when I kind of hit like an emotional rock bottom and I got myself into therapy and they started asking really tough questions about my childhood. I was in denial for a long time and I quit therapy the first time. I thought, nope, we're not talking about this. My childhood was fine. I'm not discussing it. And then those questions just seeped into my brain for a while. And a few years went by, and I thought maybe there was something to that. And so I allowed myself to be curious about my childhood and start asking myself questions. And the more I started doing that and realizing what I experienced wasn't necessarily healthy and talking about it, I realized there are thousands of us who have this similar experience. So I feel it's really important to talk about it so we can come together and know it wasn't our fault. And it's sort of like a normal human experience to have these unhealthy um, I don't know, communication skills used on us as children. And then to try to undo that as an adult is very difficult. And we need all the support we can get. So that's kind of my life's mission now is to help others learn what they went through and heal it.
Dude, that's my life mission too.
Yeah,
Ah.
I love it.
It's such a good life mission. It's been so healing for me. Has it been super healing for you?
Oh, yes. The more that I became vulnerable and started talking and realizing there's a lot of people who feel the same as me, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone because I felt so alone and isolated for so long. Um, and it's scary being vulnerable, but the more I do it, the more support I get too. So it's very healing and scary.
It's all of the things. It's all of the
Mhm.
things. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh, I totally relate 100%. And I really do enjoy your content. It's almost like a big sister is speaking to me about stuff that's going on. It's like, okay, here's the skinny of it. Here's the lowdown. This is what's happening. This is why it's happening, and this is what we got to do. So, for you guys listening that you are not familiar with Megan's content, please go check her out. Her TikTok is in the description if you want to check it out, support her. But so we're talking about childhood abuse. Do you know what ACEs are?
Yes, I do. I've heard the term, yeah.
The adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. There are many different experiences that can lead to trauma for children, and physical or sexual abuse, for example, can be like very traumatic. One-time events like a car accident or a natural disaster, or a loss of a loved one, or a major medical incident can take a psychological toll on children. And I want to get into it. Let's talk about that childhood trauma. Let's unpack it. What type of childhood trauma did you go through?
Oh, for me, it was very nuanced. I don't have one particular experience that stands out to me. That's why it was so hard for me to kind of grapple with what I went through being unhealthy, because my parents are still together. They've been married since like 1980. So I thought, oh, well, that's a sign of healthy family dynamic, right? They're still married, so there's nothing wrong with the way I was raised. So for me, a lot of what I experienced was like the silent treatment. Um, Yelling. My parents were very unhappy. They would sort of be one way in public and a different way at home, which was very, very confusing. And then I have some like religious trauma. I had a lot of trauma around the rapture and being terrified that I was just a really bad person because we went to church. And so it's different. I don't have one particular thing. I don't have any physical trauma or sexual trauma or anything like that.
Well, let's talk about the rapture because me too, I have a lot of religious trauma.
Yeah.
Um, dude, oh my gosh. So my family, my dad's side of the family is from Jamaica, and then my mom's side of the family, they're from European countries, like various ones. But they're natural born Americans. My dad's side of the family was not. And my mom's side of family did missions all her childhood, and then my dad's side of family were active missionaries, like until they died.
Wow.
And my papa was also a deacon in the Baptist Church, First Baptist Dallas, and he also run his own medical mission. They went to China, they went to Jamaica. And so from a very young age, also he taught at Dallas Baptist University. He has a doctorate in theology, and he taught theology at Dallas Baptist
Wow.
University. So it was like from the moment that I could like speak, I was getting Jesus right to the
Yeah.
face, right to the face, right to the
Wow.
jugular of just everything about Jesus. Everything you do, it's for the glory of God. It's not for your glory. Nothing is about you. It is all about God. And as an adult, I don't consider myself religious, like at all. Like at
Yeah.
all.
Same.
Um, and they talk about, oh, the gays are indoctrinating our children. No, ma'am. No, sir.
Yeah.
I experienced like serious indoctrination, like to the
Yeah.
point where my mom would tell a story of like she took me to the children's arboretum one time, and there was like a little stage and a little pulpit, and I started preaching to like little kids, like
Oh
regurgitating what I had
my
heard
gosh.
my papa say, like because he was a deacon, he would like preach occasionally, and what I heard my papa say verbatim because I had heard it so
Wow.
much.
Hmm.
And that's just so I didn't understand what I was saying. I was like 4. Like, do you think
Yeah.
do not understand? But the rapture, oh my gosh. For those that don't know what the rapture is, do you want to tell us, Megan? Do you want to tell us what the rapture is?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's basically like when Jesus is going to come back and take all the people who have lived righteously and lived by his rules, and he's going to take them all up at once, and only the bad people are going to be left, only the ones who didn't live up to his standard. That was my interpretation of it as a child. So I was also really scared of sunbeams because I was told like sunbeams were going to come from the sky when he came back. And so anytime I saw a sunbeam, I was like, today is the day. I'm getting left behind. And I would have severe anxiety around sunbeams, and which should be a really happy thing. So that's kind of sad.
Dude, I was told that like sunbeam were God rays, and
Oh God,
to this day, I don't call them sunbeams. They're like, "Oh, look at the God rays."
the God
And
ray.
my fiance is not religious like at all. And he'll be like, "Grace, that's the sun through the clouds. Enough."
That's it. Yeah. I know. It's kind of funny when you think about it, but as a kid, it was scary.
It is scary. Now, I was always told that the rapture, that there would be huge trumpets and then a giant
Mm,
earthquake, and that within a blink of an eye, a blip, all of the Christians of the world would get zooped up
yeah.
into wherever, including the bodies of the dead
Oh
Christians,
yeah.
that their souls would collide with their bodies and they would be raised from the ground. And that's why you should never cremate a body, because then they don't get to do whatever. I'm like, what? So is a zombie apocalypse is
Yeah.
gonna happen? And they were talk about like, oh, what about the Christians driving cars? Or oh, what about the Christians flying the planes? Well, they're gonna be souped. And so it'd be like a mass exodus, and then thousands of car accidents, like plane accidents, everything. I
Mm,
was terrified.
yeah.
I oh, do you know the Left Behind book series?
Yes. I never read it or watched any of those movies. I couldn't.
I was forced.
Oh, you were? Oh my God.
It is so much fear mongering of
Hmm.
my entire childhood. If you don't believe in Jesus, you done fucked up. You gonna get
Hmm.
fucked up, essentially.
Yeah.
With like none of the expletives, but essentially that. And that within itself, like, is just a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And it's a lot to unpack, even as a child. You're like, oh, I can imagine. Did your parents tell you these things, or was it in Bible
Well,
study?
I think it was probably a mixture. I don't really remember. I only really went to church with my mother for as long as I can remember. I went to preschool there, so like that's where my early education came from, and I was Southern Baptist, First Baptist Church. Um, yeah, lots of trauma there. But we were at church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesdays. We had special school called Awanas. I don't know if you did Awanas. I know. It's like a flashback. I actually found a box that my mom had given me of like all my childhood stuff, and all of my vests and pins and things that I earned through Awanas was in there and my little workbook, and it was very weird. Um, but I don't really remember my mom sitting me down and like reiterating a lot of the teachings. I think she thought she did enough by just taking me to church and having me ingrained in all of that. She was actually the preschool director for a while as well, so I was at church a lot after hours helping her and doing all that. So I think a lot of it just came directly from church and not so much my mom. But then when my parents started having problems in their marriage, then my dad started coming to church. And so then it was like even more like we were just being, it was just shoved down our throats too, like you were talking about. It was just so much when my dad got involved too. And then suddenly we just stopped going to church. And I really don't know why. There was no explanation. We just stopped going completely, like a couple of years after my dad started.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That is interesting. Uh,
it's very weird.
having it like, because as children thrive off of structure, they thrive off of consistency, and kids notice when something, even the smallest thing, changes. And
Yeah,
to be going so much, that was probably a big part of your identity as a kid, was
it
church.
was. Hmm.
And then suddenly it's just gone, and you were indoctrinated into this belief, like, at least you saying Southern Baptist. Me too. Doctrinated
Yeah,
into this belief, if you stop going to church, like you are sinning. You are
yeah,
sinning. That is a
it's very
sin.
confusing.
Hmm. That is very confusing.
Yeah. And as far as I know, they haven't gone back since. They've probably been out of church as long as they were in church at this point. Um, I really wish that I knew what had happened, but I probably will never know the answer. But I know I started to have issues with the church when I was younger. I was confused because it was like I never felt the Holy Spirit like some of these other people did in church, or I was like, I must not be doing something right. I must not be living right because this voice isn't inside of me telling me, what to do. And so I tried really, really hard and doubled down and would like only listen to Christian music in my car and read my Bible every morning and try to be like the best I could be. Um, but I started to tell my parents, like, this is confusing for me to go to youth group and see some of these people that I know are going out and partying because I was already in high school before we stopped going. And I would say these people aren't living the way Jesus wants them to live, but they come to church and they're like the top of the youth group and like super popular with the youth group leader. And this is very confusing to me, trying to be the best I can be. Um, and so my parents actually pulled me out of youth group and put me in adult church, thinking that was going to solve the problems. And then I had to do counseling with our pastor, and it made me just feel even worse. It's like, okay, I'm really doing something bad by just having these questions and making me do all this extra stuff. I'm probably like the worst person. I'm never going to heaven.
Mm.
It was difficult.
Yeah. Why did you have to do counseling with your pastor?
I don't even remember. That's the crazy thing. I don't even remember. I wish I did. All I remember is like being there with him a few times and just being really scared and having those thoughts of thinking like, what have I done so wrong that I'm having to do this? But I don't remember much else.
Mm.
Must have
My
blocked it.
my therapist calls that trauma brain, where your brain just was like, okay, this doesn't serve me. It's not important. Bloop, it's gone.
Yeah, it's too much. Yeah.
There's so much. And our brains, yes, are so great and can hold a lot of information, but sometimes that emotional information, it's almost like we're getting harmed from it. And so our body's like, okay, I'm going to turn off that part of us. If you
Yeah.
like get really seriously injured, your brain, to protect itself, will turn off the nerves of that part of your body. Like, um, I know this because this has happened to me.
Mhm.
um, I real quick slammed an ATV, that's a four-wheeler, through two barbed wire fences and
Oh,
shattered my entire left arm and split my eyelid in half. I almost lost this eye.
oh my
And
gosh.
I didn't feel anything, but I looked at myself in the mirror. I'm caked in blood, caked in like barbed wire scratches. Like my arm is a broken. I didn't
Mm,
feel anything. And I'm like, I can't feel anything. And I kept trying and I kept touching the hurt parts. I'm like, I can't feel it, but I touch other parts of my body. I'm like, okay, I can feel that. I'm alive. What is going on?
that's
It's
crazy.
Yeah. And I think our brains do the same thing for mental emotional trauma.
Oh yeah, for sure. I believe that because I have big gaps in my memory from childhood. It's like there's so many parts that I don't remember that I wish I could just go back and like unlock a little bit. It's like just give me a little bit so I can remember, but there's just nothing.
Hmm. Have you heard of EMDR?
Yes, I've actually done EMDR. That to me was like the biggest, like it helped me just get through the biggest blockages that I had when I did EMDR. It was so great. I loved it.
I want to try. I
Oh,
want
you
to
haven't
try.
tried?
No, I'm broke.
Yeah, I get that. I know I was very intimidated to try it too. I was like, this seems very, because being raised the way that we were, it's like you have a distrust of mental health help and therapy. And so it felt very much like witchcraft or something. It's like, oh, this is very woo-woo. This is out there. This isn't gonna work. And so I had a lot of distrust about it, but I thought, what's it gonna hurt? And so I went into it and tried to have the most open mind that I could. And it took me a little bit. But once I got there, it helped a ton.
That's really good. I'm glad that you got that help that you needed for
Yeah.
oh trauma, oh my goodness, this podcast purpose is to identify trauma and how we can help heal ourselves and help heal others. And the saying of the
Yes.
podcast is trauma is not who you are, it's what you go through.
Yes, I love that.
Thank you. Um, Speaking directly to our listeners, what would be your message on healing trauma?
Hmm. Just that it's possible. For me, like I talked about, I don't have one instance that stands out to me. Like, that's my trauma. That's where that comes from. What I had instead was getting into therapy and trying to be really honest with myself, um, and know like this therapist is here to help me. And when they ask questions, it's not to gain access or information, it's to help me. And I had to learn to trust that. And once I did, then it became obvious all the signs of CPTSD and all of the anxiety. And that didn't just start overnight. That started from a lot of bad programming in my childhood, whether that be religious or the way my parents parented, because they parented very authoritative and scary. So I was terrified of my parents. Um, so learning that a lot of that, the way that I am now, came from very early in my childhood, that I could undo it was very freeing, because I just, for so long, just thought, well, this is just who I am. I have anxiety. I didn't even call it anxiety because my family was so standoffish about mental health and emotions. We didn't talk about those kinds of things. So I didn't even know what anxiety was, how it presented really, until I got into therapy. And so learning all of that and learning ways to cope with it and gaining confidence was so amazing. It completely changed my life, completely. The way that my life is now, I would have never guessed it would be this way, even just like 3 or 4 years ago. So I think that's the biggest message: is it can get better, it can change. You just have to be really brave.
Yeah, you just have to be really brave and advocate for yourself
Yes.
because things can't just change for the better just by letting things be. Sometimes they can, but in general, especially if you have mental health issues or you've been through a traumatic experience, until we try to enact the change that we want, a lot of times we're just still stuck in it.
Yeah,
And
very much.
I think that's really important to recognize, is that we still have to keep pushing forward, but not to the point of like, oh, toxic positivity, it'll only get better if you make it better.
Right.
No, no, it's not true. Things can get better over time with time passing, but if we want to be healthier, we need to start putting healthy practices into play, you know?
Yeah,
And
for sure.
I had to, that was something very hard for me. That was so hard for me because I'm such a fixer of people in
Mhm.
general. I'm such a fixer. And as a kid and as an adult, I never wanted to give up on anyone ever. And
Yeah.
I think that stems from my mother, who has narcissism. And I
Mhm.
was always having to, pick up the pieces from my mom and kind of parent myself as well as parent my younger brothers. And I saw one of your videos, you talk about, narcissistic parents. Do you consider your parents to be a bit narcissistic?
That to me is really hard. I don't like to think about diagnosing my parents. I really think that there's a lot to it. I don't know that narcissism is the answer. I do believe that they display a lot of narcissistic tendencies, and that we all kind of do. There's good and bad aspects of narcissism. So I try to shy away from using that word too much, honestly. I like to use more like abusive, just straight up. Um, they're abusive emotionally. So I try to say that, or dysfunctional or toxic. I try to stay away from the word narcissistic or narcissism.
Yeah, because narcissism is a diagnosis. And
Hmm.
I do know my mother has narcissism. That's why I speak so
Right.
like openly about it, because I know she has the diagnosis and she also has the
Yeah.
diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So
Okay.
I know my mom. I know her tendencies. I know her Delulu land that she's in always. And the way that our parents raise us really does impact us as adults. Like, you think that it only really impacts you as a kid. And once you're out of your parents' house, you're free to do what you want and
Mhm.
figure things out on your own. But if you've been abused your entire life, there's such a huge blockage, and it shakes your foundation as a person of being like, I don't know what to do. Do you relate with that feeling?
Yes, so much so. I was stuck in that place of thinking, well, now I'm an adult, so my parents and I are sort of on an even playing field. Now I need to be there for them. They were there for me as a child. Now it's flip-flopped. And I stayed there for a really long time, not being in touch with who I am as a person, what my needs and what my wants were, being able to speak what I was going through. I just kept so much to myself to make sure my parents were the forefront of my life. So that was very hard to grapple with the fact that that really shouldn't be our dynamic. My life should be my life, and the focus of my life should be my children and my relationships with in my marriage and everyone else in my life. And my parents should have learned to take the back seats, and they never really did. They they like all the attention and they like being the focus of my life. So it's very hard to realize the impact of my childhood was impacting my children. That was the hardest lesson for me to learn. It's like, oh my gosh, this isn't just something between my parents and I. This is affecting every aspect of my life.
Mm-hmm. Give me like 1 second. My puppy has something that she shouldn't have.
Oh,
What do you have in your mouth? Oh, God. She took one of the covers off one of my lights.
oh,
Thanks, Mochi. Wow.
Mochi, that's cute.
Discovering new things today, huh? Oh my goodness, sorry.
That's
But
okay.
I I understand that. You're a mama, and
Yeah.
sometimes I've witnessed this. I'm not a mother, but I was a nanny to 4 boys for 7 years. And so I was like a quarter parent is what I would like to
Mhm.
call it. Because I had a lot of responsibilities, but also I lived in their home. I took care of the kids and did whatever, but I got to leave eventually and get my own place and leave and do my own thing and like wean myself off of like being their nanny. But
Yeah.
I really did recognize that when their grandparents came by to, take them out to lunch or whatever, uh, it was really interesting to see that dynamic that there were 4 little boys. The grandparents are like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna spoil you and you're gonna love me the most because at Meemaw's, there's no rules. It's all fun and games. It's all party. And then it would leave me with, like, once they got back, it would leave me with these chaotic little buttholes who think that they can do whatever they want whenever they want because like Mima has more authority than Grace, but Grace is
Mm,
like making me do my homework and Grace is making me do chores and Grace is and it was really frustrating every single time that they went off with their grandparents because it was like almost a weird reset or a 180 of the way that these kids would interact with me and interact with their own parents. And
mm,
I noticed that they would talk back a whole lot more.
wow.
And I don't know. It was really interesting to see that dynamic. And I almost always dreaded whenever the grandparents came by. I don't know why. I was just like, oh my God, here we
Oh, I
go.
could see that. It's like no boundaries, no real communication. Yeah.
Exactly. And no boundaries. Ooh, no boundaries with me either. They would just
Right.
ask me like the most random questions all the time or make me do things for them. Like they employed me. Like I had a really great relationship with my boss, Colette, who is like my second mother. She's like my real mother. Let's just be frank, because my mom was never really a mom. but she has always been there for me. And it was more like she was my mom and I was a part of their family. But whenever like these grandparents would come by, like they boss me around, they would
Oh
point out
gosh.
they would point out things that weren't clean enough. And I was
Mm.
like, okay. It's just like I'm just gonna smile and just
Gosh.
cheese my way through this. And then when they left, I was losing my mind. One time the grandma got upset with me because she was picking up the boys and I had already told them to put on their shoes and whatever. And I had headphones in while I was doing the dishes. And I guess she was calling me. I didn't hear her. Usually I hear a lot of stuff, but she like tapped me pretty hard on the shoulder. She was like, Grace, you need to take your headphones out because I've been calling you. I was upstairs and I was calling you. You didn't hear me. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Is there something that you need? She's like, you should have got the boys' shoes on. And I'm looking at them, and 3 out of 4 of them have their shoes on. The youngest one has his
Mm.
shoes on backwards. So, and he was doing that on purpose. We found out later that he was doing that on purpose to get me in trouble
Really?
because he was mad at me for something. I don't even know what it was. But
Kids
he
are
was
so smart. They will pick up on the dysfunction and use it to their advantage.
Yes, exactly. He was mad at me for some unknown reason. And you know what? That's chill. That's okay. But let's like not, get me in trouble, even though
Right.
they weren't really an authority to me. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
You,
that's interesting dynamic.
you were talking about earlier CPTSD. Have you been formally diagnosed with PTSD?
Yes.
Okay. And for those that don't know what PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's often a result of exposure to a traumatic event during childhood or adulthood. And this may be a one-time event or repetitive occurrence. And approximately 3.5% of all adults in the United States experience symptoms of PTSD every year, and an estimated 1 in 11 will receive a PTSD diagnosis in their lifetime, which is pretty cool. That's pretty cool,
Yeah.
but also like trauma is so universal. I know I'm like, oh, that's pretty
Yes.
cool, but it's universal. So many people think of trauma as like really isolating because we don't know how to adequately provide support to one another and compassion
Yes.
for each other. And like individual traumatic experiences are, yes, unique, but trauma as a whole is not unique.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think that's like when we were talking about like our life mission. I just feel like it is such a common denominator that so many of us have experienced some form of trauma that it should not be taboo to talk about it. And it shouldn't be taboo to make caveats for each other around our trauma. And I feel that's the biggest problem with a lot of older generation parents. They can't admit they went through trauma because it's so taboo for them to do so. So then they can't hold space for ours or our children's. It's just such a vicious cycle that goes on when it's such a universal experience.
Mhm. And how do you, as an adult, as a parent, start to end that cycle?
Gosh, for me, like I was saying, when I got into therapy and just started being really honest with myself, it was difficult to realize that the things that harmed me in my childhood, I was doing to my children, just inadvertently, just I wasn't even aware of it, how harmful they were. And so that's why I started setting such strict boundaries with my parents and why I'm no contact with both of them because it just didn't go well. The more that I try to set boundaries and have healthy communication, the more abusive their tactics became. And it just became obvious. I cannot focus on my parenting and try to heal the relationship with my parents. I'm going to have to pick one. And so I picked focusing on my parenting. And so what I have done is realize that my kids push my trauma buttons essentially, and it's my responsibility to heal those, not theirs. And the more that I change my parenting and parent them the way that I wish I was parenting, it heals me each and every time. And it's like parenting myself all over again. It's like this little version of me still exists and is getting healed every time I'm different with my children. So that's what I try to do. It's just like celebrate every single time I'm different than my parents would have been.
My dogs are fighting, so I had to mute
Oh,
myself. But
shoot.
I am so proud of you. I am so in awe of you and so proud of you.
Thank you.
That it takes so much introspection to be like, okay, I recognize the faults within myself. Let me do everything within my power to make sure that I adapt and overcome and change so that I don't pass my trauma on to my own children. Because in this situation, they're blameless. Like they're
Mm,
kids. They're
I
kids. Kids
know.
are going to be kids and they're going to push our buttons, but it's
Hmm.
our responsibility to respond adequately and accurately to the situation. And I talked with generic art dad Chris about, he has a diagnosis of autism. And he was talking about in his episode of, you know, his little quirks. He's like, well, sometimes my kids will do things that make me uncomfortable, and sometimes that'll make me like really upset. But then I have to recognize that, is it really their fault that they're making me uncomfortable, or is it my own thing that I have to deal with and let them know, hey, I'm a little uncomfortable with this, but is it really a behavior that I need to change in them? Or is it a
Mm,
behavior that I need to change in myself? Because they're just
yeah.
being kids. If they don't want to eat something, is me as a parent, is it helpful for me as a parent to force them to eat that thing, or to hear them and recognize that, hey, that's something that maybe they don't like? So maybe I don't serve that to them again. And they'll eat other things. It's just maybe this one thing that they don't like.
Yeah.
And I don't have kids. And I cannot fully understand yet. Hey, my children, my dogs, hold on. Hey, get out of the room. If you're gonna fight, you're gonna be in the other room because I'm doing something. Come on, Gigi, Mochi. Okay, go after the ball. Go after the ball. Gigi, out. Good girl. Thank you. Okay. Ugh, dogs are kids in a way as well, but
They are. And I'm glad I'm not the only one that animals go wild when I'm trying to do something. It's
oh
always when
yeah.
I'm trying to record or something.
Exactly. Yeah. We got a puppy, Mochi. She is 5 months old. And then I have my dog, Gigi. She's 7 years old, but she acts like a puppy. And every time we go to a dog park, they're like, oh, I love your golden retriever puppy. I'm like, no, she's 7. They're like, she acts like a puppy. I'm like, yeah, I
That's
don't
too
know what to
funny.
tell you. I don't know what to tell you. There's nothing I could do about it. But I was saying,
That's cute.
I am not a parent, so
Mhm.
I cannot empathize with what it is to be a parent, but I can definitely sympathize with, I had a big role in taking care of children and providing a lot of, you know, emotional stability, physical stability, mental stability to two parents that I helped them raise their little kids when they were itty bitty. And now they're at a point where they don't need me anymore. So I stepped back. I was the one who stepped back saying, hey, I know you guys love me so much. You do not need me anymore. You guys can do it on your own. And me staying here is actually going to hinder your kids because the oldest is now 15. Me doing all of the chores and everything, he's not going to be able to develop adequate responsibility. And I would really like him to do the thing that he needs to
Yeah.
do. He needs to do the dishes. Like you gave him that chore and he just puts it off until Grace gets here.
Mm,
And
yeah. I could see that kind of being a crutch.
yeah, I was such a help for 6 years. On the 7th year, that's when I really started to recognize of being like, the parents aren't using me. I'm getting paid really well. The kids, however, are waiting for Grace to get here, making sure that if they're gonna do chores, Grace has to be the one to tell them, and they're not listening when their parents are telling them. So,
Mm,
maybe I shouldn't be
that's funny.
anymore. And dude, immediately, like when I left, of course they were sobbing their eyes out for a while,
Mm,
which is, that's normal. Like they still text me. They all have
yeah,
phones, which I think is crazy that they all have phones, but they all have phones. So they call me and
that's
text me
nice.
occasionally. But, you know, they started to actually fall into the roles that they should have, of these kids
Mm,
having adequate responsibility for their age. And I'm so honestly so proud. I'm so proud of them.
that's awesome. It's great that you can see that.
And I can, because I don't know. I think I did a good job. And that was kind of a healing moment for myself,
Yeah.
because I'm the oldest of three and I have like 12 cousins and I'm the third
Mm,
oldest of the 12. And I always did everybody's responsibility, like for my household, my individual household,
mm.
including my mother's responsibilities. My mom never did any cooking, any cleaning,
Really?
nothing. hmm Nothing. And she was a hoarder. So there was
Mm,
stuff everywhere constantly.
wow.
And so I have not received a diagnosis of OCD, but my therapist does think I have it.
Mm,
And um I know I definitely do have some really heavy compulsions, but one of them is cleaning constantly.
mm,
I have a very good sense of smell, and if anything smells gross, or like I can smell cat pee really easily too. I was like constantly like trying to find, like as soon as we moved, constantly trying to find where the smells are coming from, cleaning rigorously. And I remember when I was 15, I went through this like huge panic attack of just cleaning and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning for
really?
literally 16 hours straight. I'm not even kidding. Like
Wow.
16 hours straight cleaning, because my mother was angry at me for her house being a mess. And she blamed me, which as soon as I make a dish, I clean it. So I'm like, none of these dishes are mine. There was mold growing in the sink. It was just bad. It
Mm,
was just so bad. And I just cleaned and cleaned. And when my fiance and I, Joey, were moving to this house, our apartment, I deep cleaned that apartment like nobody's fucking business. So good. Like so good, cleaned those carpets so good that the lady who's doing the inspection, she was like, "Oh, did you guys get new carpets?" I was like, "No. No, I cleaned.
wow.
I cleaned that carpet." And I saved us a lot of money,
I
moving out
bet.
fees and stuff, like,
Yeah.
but still, I split all of my knuckles
Mm,
from cleaning, scrubbing so hard. They were all bloody. It was really
mm,
bad. Now I have scars on my
wow.
knuckles, but that's fine. But I have to now take a step back of being like, okay, we live in a house now. There it is a bigger responsibility. It's a different responsibility, but I cannot overfunction and burn myself out, because that's just not okay, and I can't do that to myself anymore. And it's not that
Yeah.
my fiance is under functioning at all. No, I just overfunction to the point where he has no ability to do anything
There's nothing
else.
to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I noticed that within myself. I had a therapy session this week, and I noticed that, and I was like, yeah, I need to stop and slow down. Like
Yeah.
one of my fiance's tasks is to like take out the trash, and I was like, I just keep doing it, and
Mm,
he'll open the trash to see if there's any trash in there, and there won't be any. And he'll look at me, and I've noticed that. And he's not saying anything, but I think he's upset with me. My therapist was like, okay, hold up. You can't say that he's upset with you, but I
I was
think
going to
he
say that
does.
too.
Like, I think he does recognize that you're doing his job. And clearly he's opening the trash to see if there's any trash. So he's wanting to do his job. um Grace, why are you over functioning? Like, well, I want the house to look nice and smell nice and everything to be okay. And it's just like, okay,
Mm,
you can want that, but your over functioning is preventing somebody else from taking care of you. And you deserve to be
yeah,
taken care of as well. And that was
that's so
like
true.
such a, oh,
That was like a gut punch.
I deserve to
Yeah,
be taken care of, but I've like my career up until
yeah,
this point was taking care of everybody. And so it was like, mm,
yeah. I resonate with that a lot because when I first got into therapy, that's sort of where we started. Because I don't necessarily like overly clean, but there was a certain level. It's like, I don't want any dishes in the sink. It should look like no one lives here because that's how my mother raised us. I have a lot of trauma around cleaning because she always wanted our house to look like a magazine all the time. And so she would just be really cruel and give us a silent treatment and do all kinds of stuff. So I have lots of weird trauma around cleaning, but it led me to like want my house to look the same, which led to the same trauma for my kids. Like, it's just so crazy. And so learning to let there be dishes in the sink was so incredibly hard for me because my therapist was like, the world's not going to end because there's a bowl in the sink overnight. It's going to be fine. But it was so hard for me to let that go and to let a certain level, it's not like filth, but it's a level of cleanliness that's like, okay, we don't need to have a picture perfect home. It's okay. You don't have to overgive because same thing. If you're doing it all the time and then you're freaking out when no one else is helping you, or you feel like no one else is helping you because they can't, then no one's taking care of you. So that was really difficult for me to get like, okay, it's okay to let other people do their dishes. It's okay. It's gonna be fine.
yeah. Oh, 100%. It's okay to let other people have chores and
Yeah.
responsibilities. Ugh.
Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of us too, especially with mothers like ours, we only feel lovable when we're doing things for other people. So letting other people do things for you feels bad. It's like, oh no, because there's probably strings attached to that. Or like you were saying, like now they're feeling upset because, the trash is being taken out or whatever, but we're just making up those scenarios in our own head. That's not real. No one's upset with you, but it's hard to get yourself to get back to grounded with that. And if somebody has a problem, they can voice it because so many of us had to walk on eggshells around our parents or read between the lines. They never were very direct with what was upset, so you could fix it. You had to just try different things to see if any of that fixed it. So it's hard as an adult to say, nope, if people have a problem, they can bring it to you. It's scary.
Mm-hmm. It is scary. It's so scary to be vulnerable in that sense
Mhm,
because, like, I am pretty vulnerable in other senses, but to like allow someone else to, be there for me and support me and take some of that load is very hard. Even though I've been with him for
mhm.
3 years, it's very it's very hard
Yeah,
sometimes to be like, hmm, I don't know.
I know. It is hard. My husband and I have been together since 2005, and I still have that struggle. It's just not something that goes away very easily.
Yeah,
Takes practice, lots of practice.
exactly. The effects of childhood trauma can seem like they can't be cured, but with the right
Hmm.
approach, we can overcome any type of trauma and learn to cope. But the first
Yeah.
step is to recognize it
Hmm.
and
Yep.
then be patient with yourself and
Yes.
reach out for help when you need it. And even if you don't feel like you need it, but you can see that somebody else may be able to help you, to reach out honestly allows that other person to feel something. So when we were moving, and my fiance is also very similar to us, where he's very afraid of asking for help when he needs it because he thinks that there's strings attached.
Right.
And when we were moving, I called my youngest brother, and my youngest brother drove in from Lubbock twice. Like one weekend, waited another weekend, drove in another weekend to help Joey and I move because I asked him to, because he's that type of person and be like, okay, if Grace needs me, I'm going to be there.
That's
And
nice.
he's such a good little brother. I'm so proud of him.
Mhm.
But I was talking to Joey. I was like, hey, can you ask your friends? And he's like, oh, I don't want to bother them. I'm like, what do you
Oh
mean?
gosh, yeah.
What do you mean bother them? You're, would you help them if they asked you to move? He's like, yeah, I've helped them a couple times. I'm like, well, why can't you ask them? And he's like, well, they're all going through a bunch of stuff. I'm like, okay, so it really doesn't hurt to ask, because the worst thing that anyone can say is no. And then you're
Yeah,
still in the same situation you were in before. The situation didn't get
exactly.
worse. It didn't get any worse because you asked for help. You're just in the same situation as you were before. And my
Yeah.
dad, God rest his soul, my dad would tell me that all the time. And it wasn't until I've reached this point in my life where I actually recognize it and accept it of, if you need help, ask for it. If someone says no, you're in the same situation you were in before, and you don't appear weak. You don't appear weak. You just appear like you want help from somebody else. If they can't provide help, you just ask somebody else. There will be
Hmm.
another person who can make themselves available to you. Just because the first person you ask isn't available doesn't mean you can't ask another person. So
Right.
um, Joey did eventually ask, he's a plumbing apprentice. He asked one of the guys he works with to help. And that guy was like, yeah, I don't care. It's a weekend. Dude, of course I'm going to help you. And he came and
Mhm.
loaded all of our stuff into the house. And it was a lot of stuff. It was a lot of heavy stuff, appliances. Oh my gosh. Shout out, Tyler. You're a real one. Thank you. Oh my gosh. But he was like, anytime, dude. And he even brought like 5 different energy drinks for Joey. He was
Mm.
like, just all different kinds. He was like, I didn't know which one you liked, so I just
Ah,
got you
that's
a
so
lot.
sweet.
It's like, that's
I love it.
that's so sweet.
That is. Plus, it leads to just a different emotional connection when you let someone show up for you. If you never ask, then you're never allowing for that relationship to grow deeper or anything. You're just closing it off and closing yourself off. That's awesome.
Exactly. You're closing it off, you're closing yourself off. And I I made a really, really good friend at the dog park. Her name is Bailey. Shout out Bailey. I know you watch the podcast, but we started talking for 4 hours straight at the dog park. We're just walking around the dog park with our
Ah,
dogs and just
I love
talking.
that.
And we became such close friends, like instantly. And she was like, yeah, I'll help you move. And she came and helped me decorate things and organize things. And I had never like felt so, relieved. Like, she's had such a calming, considerate presence. And now we text every single day, and she's come over a couple more times, and she's going to hang out with me on Sunday when I'm selling my bracelets. And I'm like, I'm so proud of myself for being vulnerable with another human being and
Yeah,
accepting help, because now I have a good friend.
I
I have a
know.
good friend.
It really is an accomplishment to work through all of that because you could have just not said anything and then you would never have that. So you should be proud of yourself.
Ah, I have a good friend now. Let's do a my
Yes.
little happy jig. And she was so intrigued by everything that I did with like my bracelets and my podcast. And she was like, oh, I'm gonna support you 100% right now. I want a podcast sticker, and then I want you to make me like 2 bracelets, and then make my other friend a choker. And I was like, okay. And I
I
did,
love
and
it.
she paid me.
Hell yeah. I just feel like you get so much more support from people that you meet like that than you do from people you may have known your whole life or your family. Like the support you expect to have from some people is just not there. It's the strangers, the people you meet on the internet, and the people you meet in passing that support you more than anyone. I love it.
I love it too. Do you have any resources or recommendations you'd like to share?
Well, I do offer one-on-one coaching for, anybody who is interested in that. And then also I am in collaboration with an LPC. She runs Living Truth Counseling, and we created an online women's group. It's me, the LPC, and another life coach, and we meet every other Monday. And it's for women 18 and over right now. We may expand to do other genders and stuff, but right now we're just focusing on women. So it's really fun. We just get together for like an hour and a half and do activities and icebreakers, and it's just like a little fun support group. So I have that going, and then that's pretty much it for me individually. Every once in a while, I run a course. I don't have anything coming up right now. Maybe in the next month or two, I'll have a course that I'll be advertising. But right now, just one-on-one coaching and my support group. And then I always recommend this book that was recommended to me like 100 million times. adult children of emotionally immature parents. If you suspect that you have some sort of trauma, it is a great book. It took me a little while to get through it. My husband and I read it together, and we had to take breaks to just let ourselves feel because it's a very deep book, but it is great. It's amazing. And a lot of different therapists and life coaches recommend that book. So if you haven't read that, you can even find people reading it on YouTube if you don't have the money to buy the book, which is what we did. We listened to somebody reading it. So that was really cool that we could do that and do that together. It was a bonding experience for the both of us too.
It sounds like a fun bonding experience. Please send me the links for your coaching and for the licensed professional counselors coaching
Okay.
stuff. And I will put those in the description for you guys
Okay, awesome.
listening. I'm going to put them in the description so that you guys can get to it. And I will also put the Adult Children of Emotionally Unavailable Parents book in the description
Yes.
as well.
Lindsay Gibson is the author of that book, and she's amazing. I think she does some YouTube content as well, which I love YouTube. I watch so much YouTube for self-help. So that's another good resource. If you have, you just, type in any little hashtag, and there's so much stuff that comes up.
Exactly. YouTube, I love being on YouTube. I love being a
Me too.
YouTuber. Oh, it's so fun. It's so fun. Support is always available. Like whether or not we know it, it's available.
Yeah.
Reach out, and if you feel like the people in your inner circle are not supportive, branch out to find new people. I know it's so
Yes,
hard, but it's so rewarding. Like speaking
it
from personal
is.
experience, like Bailey is my new best friend. So
Yeah,
it's like it's
I love
so
it.
rewarding. It's so rewarding. There's
Yeah.
also talk therapy,
Hmm.
um, cognitive behavioral therapy, stress reduction includes like mindfulness, going out and taking a
Yes.
walk.
Mindfulness is great because a lot of
Mindful.
us get stuck in rumination, especially when we have trauma or people pleasers. So mindfulness is so great to heal some of that.
Mhm. Something that really helps me is journaling just one sentence every single day. And sometimes
Hmm,
I'll write a lot more. And when I just sit down with my pen, I always pick a pen of a different color, and the color is based on my general mood. And then I'll change
I
the
love
pen
that.
color as I keep writing. And it has been genuinely one of the most healing things for me because I can look back on my journal and flip through the pages and see all of the different colors and recognize that life is not one note. My life is not
Mm,
one general, oh, this is bad, oh, this is bad, oh, this is bad, because that's what
right.
trauma can do to us of like feeling like, oh, my life is shitty, oh, my life is shitty. When you take the time to journal and actually process, okay, yes, this part is going bad, but also these cool things happened. It has
Yeah,
really changed my life like completely. I mean, if you
I love
guys
that.
like go back and watch like the first episode of the podcast versus me now, I am so much more mindful. I'm so much more grateful and appreciative of the life that I have today, and that life can get better in so many more ways than we can even expect or imagine.
Yes, that is so true. We cannot understand the beauty of life without leaving space for the pain. So I think that's great. That's the human experience altogether. It's the good and the bad. So I love that.
Well, thank you so much, Megan,
Thank you.
for
So
sharing.
fun.
Oh, it was so
Yeah,
fun. I know it was so short, but like it
I
was good.
know.
It was good.
Yeah,
Thank you for taking the
good.
time out of your busy schedule to come on the podcast and
Yes.
talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for what you're doing. I think it's great that you have a podcast and it's a healing space for people. I think it's wonderful.
If you're watching us over on YouTube, here are our memes of the week, carefully curated from the amazing people over on our Discord server. Now let's get into those memes. And if you want us to share more memes on this little segment, then you need to add your memes into the meme channel on our Discord server. So let's get into it. right. So at the end of every episode, we spin our wheel of emotions to learn a new feeling and how it correlates to trauma. So that's out. Let's zoom in. Let's zoom in. Ooh, ooh. So here's our wheel of emotions. Let's spin it. Okay. Frustrated, infuriated, irritated. Frustrated, infuriated, irritated. Okay. So I think a lot of us can really relate to feeling frustrated when it comes to dealing with trauma of any kind, because a lot of times we're like, okay, what's wrong with me? You know, like, oh, there's something wrong. And it's almost like, do I deserve it? Am I the common denominator in all of this shit that's happening constantly in my life? And no, we don't ever deserve trauma. And that's what's so, for me, so frustrating, is because I don't deserve it. I feel like a lot of my brain power goes towards like what I deserve and what I don't deserve. And I think I need to stop that thinking. I think I need to stop that thinking. I got to stop that train of thought, because life isn't really about what you deserve. If it was, we would live in a utopia. We really would. And the people that didn't deserve great life, they would be locked up, right? Because they would deserve it. But life isn't like that. We got to do the best we can with what we're given. And when we're feeling irritated or frustrated, it's our body's way of telling us that there's something wrong, and let's do everything in our power to rectify it. And if we can't fix the problem, then maybe we need to move on and do something else. You know, I have to tell myself that all the time. Lucy, get down. No. I have to tell myself all the time that if I'm not the problem, right? And if I can't fix the problem, then it's out of my hands, it's out of my control. And I need to devote my energy elsewhere. Energy elsewhere. Devote it somewhere else where it's needed. Because I think that's when I'm the most frustrated, is when there's so many things out of my control and I can't do anything about it. So I have to devote my energy elsewhere to the things that I can control and the things that can give me life and the things that can benefit me. And a lot of times I get really frustrated, being honest, I get really frustrated with people not taking their own mental health seriously, or using their mental health as an excuse to do something that they don't want to do, but they're fully capable of doing, if that makes any sense to you guys. Like, this person is no longer my friend. I don't consider them a friend, but I used to consider them a very close friend. And they would constantly use, oh, I'm not really feeling up to it today. Oh, my mental health is not great. And they would constantly isolate themselves. And I thought they were just isolating themselves in general, but no, they were just avoiding me. And they were using their mental health as a way to, you know, and that makes me so frustrated because I'm someone who advocates so much for mental health, but there are a lot of people who will use it in a way that is not supportive for themselves, and it's definitely not supportive for other people. They'll use it as an excuse to be like, oh, I don't want to do this thing, so I'm going to blame my mental health on it. That's not what mental health is. But yeah, it is what it is. And when we're frustrated, our body is telling us that there's something wrong. If you can't rectify the problem, then move on to a different one or treat yourself. Do something nice for yourself. And in my own experience, doing something nice for myself is usually getting a little sweet treat, like a coffee or boba, or making myself lemonade. I got some Cane's lemonade. I recycled the cup and I made my own lemonade, And in my brain, it tricks my little brain to think that, oh, I'm drinking something made for me, and that means that tastes really great. I don't know, I'm a weirdo, bro. And just a quick disclaimer, I'm not perfect. I'm by no means perfect. I'm just talking about my life and what I correlate these things to. And you can just take it at face value, You don't have to listen to me. But if you do listen to me, put it in the comments that you care. I don't know if people even watch this segment of the podcast or listen to this segment of the podcast where I'm just rambling about emotions. But if you do, let me know. I would really appreciate it. And just a quick reminder before we part, this podcast seeks to forge a strong community. So please don't hesitate to join our Discord to share with others and get podcast updates. Ooh. In the Discord, we have so many different channels of discussion that include more than just trauma. We wish to create a place where you can be heard. So please, please join us. You are needed and appreciated, and we'd love to meet you, know you, and support you. And if you'd like to support the podcast, we have a Patreon. Different tiers can get you a bracelet that is a handmade bracelet made by me, Grace, or you can get a sticker like the one on the back of my computer. We also have merch on Bonfire where you can get custom apparel designed by yours truly. All of those links are in the description. Any support helps us out a lot. So if you feel compelled to, please like, subscribe, rate the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and share the show with your friends. Remember, you are capable of a fulfilling life in spite of your circumstances and your trauma. May you rise again from the ashes and be filled with peace, hope, love, joy, and understanding. I'll see you guys in the next episode. I am so glad that we made it to 40. We made it to 40. Thank you guys. I could not have done it without you guys. So you guys have a blessed rest of your week. Make good choices. Goodbye.